welcome everyone. I'm Vicki Eppler. I'm the president of Congress Park Neighbors. Congress Park Neighbors is an RNO that is over 40 years old. We're an all-volunteer organization, and our goal is to provide accurate information to neighbors about the neighborhood and issues that city government is deciding on and managing. We do not take positions on any issue or at any city meeting without first polling affected neighbors to ensure that we truly represent you. We welcome homeowners and renters alike. This meeting is being recorded. I would ask that everyone withhold from the chat until we have a question period. We have several people on the agenda tonight representing issues that are on the ballot on April 4th. First, we're going to welcome Ken Ho, and he is going to talk about the Westside Development project on the city, on the Park Hill Golf Course land that will be on the ballot under 2-0, 2-O, the letter O. I've asked Ken to, many of us are familiar with this project, but there is conservation easement on the land, and that has been a question that neighbors have raised many times. So Ken, thank you for being here tonight and talking to us. Again, everyone, at the end of Ken's presentation, we will have an opportunity to ask questions. So please listen to his presentation, and then we'll go from there. Thank you. Go ahead, Ken. Thanks for being here.
Oh, good evening, Victoria. My name is Kenneth Ho with Westside Investment Partners. The host has disabled screen sharing. Am I able to?
I can give that to you.
Okay, thank you, Maggie. Just let me know when that, when that's gone through. There we go.
You should have it now, Ken.
Thanks, Maggie. All right. Is everyone able to see my screen?
Yes.
Great. Thanks so much. Again, thank you for your time this evening. My name is Kenneth Ho with Westside Investment Partners. We are the owners of the privately owned golf course that is the Park Hill Golf Course. The reason why we're here is because that golf course actually was forced to close in 2018 related to the Platte to Park Hill project. Again, it's private property, and rather than restoring it as a golf course per the easement, the city created a forbearance agreement to actually have a conversation with the community surrounding the golf course about what that land should be or should become. And so in the interim 3.5 years, we've really spent time looking at that property. And of course, this is all in the context of a citywide shortage of high quality affordable housing. And there's really an opportunity to address both parks and open space, affordable housing, and create a new form of smart development and equitable development. And as Victoria mentioned, on April 4th, you will be asked as part of Measure 2O what you want to do with this land. And it really comes down to a simple choice. A no vote means keeping the land as a golf course. And a yes vote would mean new public parks, affordable homes, and services for the community. And I'll get more into detail on that. Just to let you know kind of the path that it's come through already, there was a small area planning process as well as a rezoning process. So on October 19th, of last year, went through the planning board. City council then approved our small area plan. And then on January 23rd, city council approved the rezoning along with legally binding agreements, development agreement that I'll go through today. And then they also approved the ballot language for referral to the April 4th election. To learn more about our plan, you can go to yesforparksandhomes.com. And obviously, we would encourage you to vote yes on 2O. Just to give everybody a context, and Victoria, you're not the only one who confuses the Park Hill Golf Course with City Park Golf Course. It's actually often done because they are very close to each other on the map. In fact, the City Park Golf Course and City Park, the largest park in the city, is closer to the Park Hill Golf Course than a full-service grocery store. This golf course is not sitting just in the middle of nowhere. It is actually adjacent to the existing 40th and Colorado A-Line station and also future bus rapid transit along Colorado Boulevard. So this is really at the intersection of two very significant transit opportunities. The land itself has been operated as a golf course and is privately owned since 1931. It was an all-white golf course until 1966 when it integrated, and again, golf course operations ceased in 2018 until now. There is a conservation easement between the city and the landowner that is on the land. It's a joint agreement between the private landowner and the city, and it's more of a use restriction. The only allowable use on the land, or the primary use, is a regulation length 18-hole daily fee golf course and driving range. The easement actually expressly forbids other land use that would limit the ability for a regulation length 18-hole daily fee golf course and driving range to exist on the land. And so in order to have a new public park of the scale that we're talking about, or any new affordable housing or otherwise, is to lift that easement. And because of the passage of Initiative 301 in 2021, it also requires a citywide vote, which is why we're having Measure 2O in the first place. Just so you guys, you can go to our website and access the full document, but the relevant paragraphs 4A and 4B in the existing conservation easement actually talk about permitted uses, right? It explicitly creates an affirmative obligation for the golf course land. It shall be occupied, used, operated, and maintained as a regulation length 18-hole daily fee public golf course. And it allows related uses that are accessory or incidental and unrelated recreational uses such as ball fields and tennis courts. However, the very next sentence says no use of the golf course land shall be permitted that would be a detriment to the existence and operation of the golf course. In other words, you can have other uses there as long as a regulation length 18-hole golf course exists and operates there under the existing easement. There are other parts of the agreement that, again, enforce the need for this to be used as a golf course, and I can answer that during different questions. But it really, again, comes down to that choice of whether you want it to be primarily used as a golf course or you would like to look at other uses. And based on the conversations that we've had over the thousands of conversations we've had over the last 3+ years, there's a desire for something else there, especially additional housing near transit and affordable housing, because as we all know, whether you're a homeowner or a business owner, there's an affordable housing crisis in the city of a scale of, really in the tens of thousands. Really, the estimates right now are between 40 and 60,000 affordable units necessary. So we really can't talk about this being parks versus homes. It's really about parks and homes. And so what is our vision? So in response to the community, we've made sure that we're dedicating more than 100 acres, nearly 2/3 of the 155 acres, for parks and open space. That would create the 4th largest park in the city, and its 11th regional park. The balance of the land will be a mixed-use transit-oriented development that'll have at least 25% affordable units. We'll have a significant range of housing prices and types, and I'll go through that later on in my presentation, but kind of a context of at least 650 affordable units, assuming that we get to about 2,500 units of total housing. Just to give you guys some representative images of how much more than a golf course can this property can be, and being representative, there's going to be open parks and open spaces of different scales. We have a partnership with Butterfly Pavilion to make sure that the land goes from a water-thirsty Kentucky bluegrass that golf course that used 106 million gallons of water a year, 3 tons of fertilizer, and 1,600 pounds of pesticides to pollinator habitat and drought-tolerant plant landscapes. You'll see that there are different scales of housing. Really, the intent is to go from 3, 5, 8, and then way at the top near transit, the possibility for up to 12 stories. And then also focus on everybody being able to use the park from young to old, families and singles, and really emphasizing safety day or night, and emphasizing pedestrian and bicycle use over cars. What you see here is the 303 Artway Heritage Trail. It's actually a community focused initiative that came up before any of the discussions of what should happen with the Park Hill Golf Course could be. Originally, they planned this connection, which would be a bicycle pedestrian connection to the Colorado and 40th A-line station from the surrounding neighborhoods along Colorado Boulevard. And I don't know if any of you guys have ever biked or walked along Colorado Boulevard. It's a pretty noxious experience. And so they are actually excited about bringing the 303 Artway Heritage Trail through the property for a couple of reasons. One, increase in safety by having the activity of development near it, the housing and commercial development with eyes essentially on this pathway. And two, because the whole point of the Artway Heritage Trail, as its name implies, is to actually honor the history and culture of the surrounding neighborhoods with art and monumentation related to the Artway. And so we really wanted to bring it through the community in order to center the community on that history and make sure that everyone recognizes that this development is in Northeast Park Hill. This is again an example of where the housing scale comes down, which allows for different types and different price points, as well as access to fresh food, which in an area that's currently a food desert. We've already had a number of food trucks that we have there on Thursdays because of the food desert. And really, it's not just about parks and homes here. We also have commercial areas in a main street on 38 that will allow for small and BIPOC and minority-owned businesses. And also, what we're really excited about is how the development spills into the park. And rather than having a road separating development or even a state highway separating the development from the park, we now have the 303 Heritage Artway Trail. And what that allows for is that you'd be able to go down this main street, have a meal, get your haircut, get some ice cream with your family, and be able to stroll directly into the regionally sized park without having to cross a major road. That's something that happens in a lot of other places around the country, but not very frequently in Denver and Colorado. So let's get into the details of what that 100 acres of new public parks and open spaces will look like. Again, this is all the result of, as part of our entitlement process, we had a legally binding and enforceable agreement called a development agreement that we agreed, that was also approved by City Council. And it lays out a number of different obligations. One of those obligations is the minimum 100 acres of parks and open space. And it actually talks about an immediate conveyance of 80 acres, basically the easternmost portion of what you're seeing here as a regional park will be immediately conveyed to the city. And then there will be a planning and design process for that land that we will be contributing to as the developer. We are actually going to be contributing more than $20 million for design, planning construction of capital improvements, including playgrounds, dog parks, public restrooms. And the reason why we don't have the 100 acres being conveyed day one is because we actually don't know where all the roads are yet. And in order to convey that land, we actually need to have a legal description of it. And so once we actually go through the infrastructure master planning process, then we'd be able to convey specific parcels to the city. In addition, we also want to make improvements to a lot of the land before transferring it over to the city. But just from a scale standpoint, right, from 35th Avenue to 40th, that's actually a half mile. And so when you're looking at this Western Greenway, the minimum dimension here is 200 feet. And so it's not, these are not small areas. It's just that this is a very large area that we're looking at here. But what that really provides is a different, as I mentioned, different scales of playground areas. When my children were young, I lived near Platt Park, which is also near Wash Park, but I would always take my kids to Platt Park because it was such a smaller, more intimate space. I didn't have to worry about them getting run over by a bicycle or hit by a volleyball. And so what this allows for are, large regional improvements, as well as smaller, more intimate play areas in one space. And you see the 303 Artway Heritage Trail kind of weaving through here and really being the boundary between development and the park space. In addition, as I mentioned, we'll be creating pollinator habitats with the butterfly pavilion, and we'll more than double the tree canopy that exists on the property right now by planting nearly 1,000 new trees. In terms of the specific active park uses, again, that will be coming through the planning process, but we've heard loud and clear from the community that they would like to see things like ball fields, as well as potentially even a field house that would really support many of the youth sports activities in the area. Just to give you a comparison on size of what that 100 acres is, the reason why we have 95 acres here is because there's an obligation of 10% of the developable area to be privately owned but publicly accessible parks and open space. So we're netting that out. But at 95 acres, it'll be the 4th largest park in the city, the largest being City Park, then Wash Park, Sloan's Lake Park, and then whatever we choose to name this one. But just to give you a scale, Cheeseman, Berkeley Lake Park, Central Park are all around 80 acres or less than 80 acres. The other thing to note here is that these large parks all have, or many of them have, regional drainage in the form of detention or retention ponds or other uses within them. And similarly, there's a detention or retention pond that is in the area that we the city plans to research and see if we can integrate that more usefully. There's already a lot of trails, and the City Park golf course, in fact, is one big detention area. So it can be absolutely used in a more efficient manner, and as the planning goes forward, there's intention to make that happen there. There's also a number of guaranteed infrastructure improvements, probably not as accessible for folks who don't visit this site often, but this intersection here at 40th and Albion and 35th and Colorado are 2 of the most unsafe intersections in the area. We will be giving up land to expand and improve the safety associated with those intersections. We'll also be creating a full movement intersection at 38th for the Main Street, but also to connect to the 39th Avenue Greenway, which is an important piece of infrastructure, also part of a stormwater system, but is a great amenity, and we want to create those bicycle connections across major highways such as this. What you'll also notice is that we don't have roads going through the park. I think COVID taught us that we don't need to have those roads through there. The city will obviously be planning a lot of pedestrian and bicycle pathways along with parking at the boundaries, but we fought hard to make sure that we didn't need to have any major streets going through there. The city in order to serve this park, mandated that we put an extension on Dahlia here and asked us for $4.2 million. We're going to be funding that. So that's on top of the $20 million that we've already dedicated. And if that $4.2 million is not used fully for the Dahlia Street connection here, it will go towards capital improvements in the park area for public park spaces.
Ken, sorry to interrupt. You have about 5 minutes left.
No problem. Yep. No worries. Yeah, we'll go through it.
Take
So
questions.
it's not just about parks. There's also diverse, high quality housing, and this is again in the development agreement, obligations for 25%, a minimum of the units. But regardless of how many units are built, we actually have minimums that are required, and there's a lot of definition around that. So a minimum of 300 entry level for sale income restricted homes. Our partners will be Habitat for Humanity and Elevation Community Land Trust for that. Majority will be 2 or 3 or more bedrooms for families. And this is really in response to what the community desired here, which is for access to for sale affordable housing. It'll average less than 100% of AMI. Senior housing was also asked for 60%, 60 IRUs or more, which will average less than 50% of AMI, responding to the surrounding incomes in the area, as well as permanent supportive housing, which will have wraparound services and really services folks that are at a very low income level from 0 to 30% of AMI. Families also, there's a big focus on providing affordable housing for families. And so there will be at least 150 rental IRUs averaging less than 55% of AMI, and more than half of those will be over 2 bedrooms. The agreement also requires us to have 5% of all market rate units to be IRUs integrated into the market rate projects. And so that will vary based on the number that we build out there. Just to give people a sense of what AMIs are, and currently, for 60%, that means there could be a family of 4 making $70,000 that would be able to purchase a property, which in Denver is just unheard of right now. And we'd be the 30% units would go for even less people making less than minimum wage. In addition, we're going to have a community benefits agreement, which is another legally binding agreement and enforceable. There's going to be a CBA, Community Benefits Agreement Implementation Committee, that will monitor compliance and accountability. Again, just like the development agreement, the CBA runs with the land. So it means that anyone that we sell the land to will still be bound by those requirements. And it repeats all of the housing commitments that I just discussed in a second legally binding agreement. In addition, we've created space for a new grocery store. Nearly 2 acres will be available for any full service grocery store that chooses to locate here, and will not, that will be made available at no cost to that grocery store for a period of 10 years. And if it doesn't attract a grocery store in that time, the community will be able to discuss what that parcel will eventually become. In addition, we'll be doing investments. Yeah.
I'd like you to wrap it up. Your time is running out.
Oh, I thought that I had 20 minutes.
That included time for people to.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't get the email.
So let's go ahead.
Let's go through just one thing that I'll mention here is the Property Tax Anti-Displacement Fund, which I'm particularly proud of. It's a program that's never been done in Colorado before, where low-income homeowners within a half mile of the property will actually be able to we will pay their incremental property taxes from 2024 levels. So if it's really an anti-displacement strategy to make sure that people are not involuntarily displaced from their homes due to rising property values that might be associated with the development of the site. It's really one of those green, parks-related anti-displacement strategies to address the potential for green gentrification. With that, really, and just wrapping up here, it's it's about parks and open space, but also affordable housing and community places for the community to gather, and for fresh food, access to fresh food and economic opportunity. So with that, these are just some of our endorsers. And if you would like to learn more or become part of our campaign to bring affordable housing and parks to Denver, you can access our website through this QR code. Thanks so much.
Miles, if you would like to go first and ask a question.
Yeah, I just have a couple of questions. Kenneth. I posted some things. Before you purchased the property,
Mhm.
did your company have contact with the city about that conservation easement and how it might be removed?
No, we did not. We read the conservation easement and we understood the rules under which it could be amended and or removed, and that was how we understood it.
So you've never had any
We've abided by all of those rules as well.
So then when you bought the property, you realized that you possibly couldn't get that conservation easement removed. And then what was going to be your back position if you weren't able to redevelop it?
The backup plan always is that this land would need to go back to being a golf course per the easement itself, which it clearly states. And in terms of, I'm not sure what you mean by realizing what the changes are. If you're referring to the state statute and the reference to impossibility, that only applies if a state conservation easement tax credit has been issued, and there has been no such state conservation easement tax credit issued for this property. So I know you probably have read, some of that misinformation out there, but that is simply not true. And we've actually checked that with the Keep It Colorado and conservation easement groups, and they agree that merger of title is a way to remove a conservation easement when there has been no state conservation easement tax credit issued for property.
Can you tell me what the value per your current development plan? What is the value? What is going to be your return? What will the land be worth at the end of the redevelopment? It looks like you have 8-story buildings and you've got a mix of apartment buildings and things for sale. What type of return are we looking at?
I won't discuss kind of specifics, but it certainly isn't a return that exceeds probably minimums, and certainly doesn't return for or isn't a sufficient return for the risk taken initially. But that said, we didn't anticipate COVID and some of the durations out there. And again, we listened to the community and changed the amount of parks and open space from 60 acres to 100 acres. And we've also because we brought in and heard loud and clear from the community that they wanted to see for sale affordable housing, we're donating 7.8 acres to Habitat for Humanity and Elevation Community Land Trust for those for sale affordable homes. It's really a major priority that's out there, and has always been something that missing middle housing has been something that we've wanted to do from the get-go, and we decided to sacrifice economic return in order to provide that amenity and housing to the community. We're also donating the land for the permanent supportive housing, because we know that housing is really difficult. And we're donating the land for the grocery store. In addition to that, we're, while we're building the roads and parks, we're also donating all of that back to the city as well.
We have time for one more question, and then we need to move on. Maria, would you like to ask a question?
Yes, I would. You had a slide, Mr. Ho, about the community benefits agreement.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been asking to see that. You've issued an executive summary, but I've asked to see the community benefits agreement several times since the council hearing on January 23rd. And I still don't have it. I've been told it hasn't been signed yet. When is the community benefits agreement going to be made public? Because I think there are a lot of us who would like to.
Yeah, it's actually, what's striking is that it was recognized by the attorneys on the other side that this is the most comprehensive community benefits agreement that he's seen outside of California. There are two parties to that agreement, Mariah, and as I mentioned, the other party is a group of community members who have insisted on confidentiality to this point. I put you in touch with their lawyer, Noah Stout, who speaks for them Unfortunately, again, it's a two-party agreement, so I can't make unilateral decisions about that. That's part of, part of the whole thing, that we actually have to work together on this. And so it's really up to them at this point. And Noah can talk more about what their position is on that.
I've asked Noah for the agreement
Mhm.
and he hasn't sent it to me. Are you saying that the folks who negotiated the agreement on the side, that you have Westside negotiating and then this group of individuals and they don't want to be identified and we still haven't seen the community benefits
No,
agreement?
they actually have identified themselves through the letter of support that they put out there. You have the Northeast Denver Islamic Center, the Greater Metro Denver Ministerial Alliance, Clayton Park Hill Pirates, or Clayton Denver.org, Denver Metro Community Impact, St. Thomas Episcopal Church, a number of different community groups, as I mentioned out there. But I think that, if you look at the different CBAs that have been signed around the city, actually none of them are public documents. Those are private documents. But again, it's not up to me unilaterally to make that decision.
Okay, so
I've
you can tell
summarized
us
all of
what's
that.
in it, but we
Excuse
can't
me.
see it.
Excuse
That's
me.
right.
We're going to have to cut this off. I'm sorry. I know. Thank you, Ken, for coming and giving a presentation.
Great. All right. Well, thanks so much, Victoria. I appreciate the time and appreciate you guys interested in a very important issue. We need to make sure that the facts are out there. So thanks so much.
Thank you. Now we're going to hear from Penfield Tate on yes for parks and open space, but I need to make an announcement before we start. Penfield is also running for city council at large, and he is here tonight to speak about yes for parks and open space. But Penn, I would also like to offer you 10 minutes at the end to discuss your candidacy for at-large. We also have 2 other at-large candidates here, and to make sure that we're equitable for everyone present. Penn, please go ahead and make your presentation, but there will be time at the end to present your candidacy.
Thank you, Vicki. And if I may, if someone will let me share the screen, I have a presentation as well.
Maggie, there we go. Thank you.
All right. Hang on, let me get this queued up properly. Okay. My name is Penfield Tate. I am a longtime resident of Northeast Denver. I've been in Northeast Denver for the last 2 years now, either in 5 Points or for most of that time, almost 40 years in Park Hill. Many of you I know have had an opportunity to visit with before. I'm an attorney by training. I'm a public finance attorney, so the public projects are what I work on. For some of you, I was at one point your state representative. For some of you, I was at one point your state senator. And during my time in the legislature, this land that's at issue, this Park Hill Golf Course land, was always within my legislative district. And it is about 10 blocks from my house. Let me talk very briefly about the history of this site. The Park Hill Golf Course site, this land, the conservation easement was acquired by the city initially in 1997 when Mayor Webb used our tax dollars to acquire the land for us. The original plan that voters had approved was to buy the entire site. But because of the passage of time, the money that voters allocated for this was not sufficient to buy the land. So when the Clayton Foundation that owns the land across the street decided it wanted to sell because it needed money. What it did instead was sell the development rights to the people of the city and county of Denver. So while it is true, this land is owned by the developer can do nothing without the consent of the people and complying with law, because we collectively own the development rights and have since 1997. That's important to realize, because it's also important to understand the developer knew about this legal impediment when they bought the land. And with the Yes on Parks and Open Space campaign and Save Open Space Denver, we've had several Colorado Open Records Act requests and found that indeed neither the city nor the developer really understood the law when the land transaction took place. So the developer initially didn't realize that they could not just cut a deal with this mayor and have the land and the easement go away. And so that's why we've been going through this battle for the last 3 years. This is our land. And what I think is important is we all know that we need affordable housing. And indeed, when I talk about the candidacy, that is probably the most pressing issue of the day, along with the plight of the unhoused. But it's a false choice to try to say that you have to trade open space, and that's the only way you get affordable housing. Indeed, in my time over the last 40 years representing developers, no one of my clients ever went to a city and said, we'll blow up a block of buildings and build you a park. It's always the opposite. It's always give us your open land and then we'll develop on it. And so this is an asset that we need to preserve. This 155 acres, as you saw with Kenneth's presentation, is the third largest open expanse of land in the city of Denver, behind City Park and Warsh Park. So when the developer says that we'll give you the fourth largest park, that's not a deal. We already have the third largest expanse of open space. To go further, if you look at this map, these red circles represent planned affordable housing developments that are either on the books or for which permits have been requested. These yellow dots represent transactions that have occurred by developers who are planning to build mixed-use development right along the 40th and Colorado Boulevard transit stop, which we contend is where large-scale development, especially 12-story buildings, ought to be built, not along Colorado Boulevard. Next, the developer tells you that they're making 100 acres of open space. The math doesn't work. That's simply not true. This area here is the 25 acres of the stormwater detention pond that the city condemned at the time before Westside bought the land. Westside was paid $6 million for this land. So their net purchase price for all of this was $18 million. That'll be important in a minute. If you go to this land now and see the stormwater improvements and work that's been made, from this point north is about a 25 to 30 foot drop. There are concrete structures, metal structures. This is not parkland. This is not recreation land. And the city currently has no plans to improve it. So when people talk about it could be open space, yeah, maybe in the future, but that's not currently on the table. Secondly, with the remaining acreage, since the developer is keeping 55 acres, you have less than 75 acres of open space, because in Congress Park, you have 7th Avenue. In my neighborhood, we have 17th Street, we have Martin Luther King Boulevard, and we have Monaco Parkway. There are grass strips in between the lanes of traffic going in alternating directions. But none of us who live in these neighborhoods think of these grass strips as parks or playgrounds or recreational areas. Maybe you can walk your pet, maybe you can walk or jog, but it's not open space in this sense. That's simply not the case. I would also note that the developer wasn't forced to close the golf course when they acquired the land. They asked for permission. The interesting thing about that is you have the developer and the city claiming the land can only be used as a golf course under the easement, but for the last 3 years, they haven't complied with the easement because they haven't run a golf course. In addition, when the city condemned the land for the stormwater works and paid the developer $6 million, the city also paid for a study that showed that this land could be reconfigured. That's part of why they paid $6 million, so that if the developer chose to do so, it could continue to operate the land as a golf course. Now, the developer has the prerogative. They chose not to do that, and that is fine. The next thing to realize about this land is it's home to a number of native species and other natural habitat. It is a cooling oasis in a concrete jungle. It helps air quality, and it is accessible open space for communities that haven't had that much open space for years. When you look at the surrounding area and you look at the pressures in this community, open space has been something that's at a premium. We haven't had a lot of it. We don't need to pave it over with more concrete. We know we need affordable housing. It's happening in other parts of the city. We know the troubled history of this land in terms of racial restrictions, but the other thing I will tell you is since 1966, ironically, Park Hill Golf Course and its clubhouse were venues that were inviting to the African-American community when downtown hotels would not let African-American institutions like the Owl Club of Denver host their debutante ball or other activities. Kenneth has talked a lot about the conservation easement. Let me speak to that. As a lawyer, I can tell you, Kenneth has selectively picked language out of the document. The demising clause of the conservation easement says that it's established to preserve open space and for recreational purposes. And indeed, the body of the document says that other uses such as ball fields, tennis courts, and other activities are allowed on the site. It is not limited to golf. And the way a conservation easement works under the law, it's intended to preserve open space. There are many of them around the state. The idea is to preserve the natural state of land and for not ever allowed to be preserved, to be developed, which is why the state statute says that if you want to abolish, amend, or repeal a conservation easement, you have to go to court and get an order that says because of changes on the land or around the land since the creation of the easement, it is impossible, not hard, not financially difficult, but physically impossible to obtain and maintain the original purposes of the conservation easement, which in this case are recreation and open space. The reason the city and the developer have this convoluted deal with this tortured land swap is they know they cannot meet the statutory requirements. That isn't misinformation, that's the law. And they're doing this tortured land swap where the developer gives the city the land, and the city turns around and gives back part of it right away, is because they know they can't go to court and make the showing. So they're trying to come up with another legal justification for permitting development. With respect to 2.0, that'll be on the ballot. This was something that all of you asked for when we at Yes for Parks and Open Space and SOS Denver fought this initially. We went to you, the voters, and we added an ordinance into the city's books of ordinances saying that no land covered by a conservation easement could be developed commercially or residentially without a vote of the people. But that requirement is in addition to the state statute. And also consider this, and I saw this question in chat, and let me answer it now. We believe, and we explained to the city council, that the fair market value of this land without the conservation easement is upwards of $60 million. That means the developer paid $24 million, 18 actually, for land that is now going to be worth $60 million with this exchange that this tortured land swap. We believe that is an unconstitutional gift to a private person. It's our real estate asset. The conservation easement is something we own, and no twisted land exchange can give away what we bought and paid for. And that's a fundamental problem with this transaction. We need affordable housing, but we also need open space. And as when I was in law school, one thing my property professor said is get land because God's not making any more of it. When this open space is gone, we'll never get it back. We need to preserve it. We've got these mature, beautiful trees on site now, as you can see. When they redevelop, just like they did at Loretto Heights, when this developer tore down all the trees, they're going to plant seedlings. And most of us will not see trees like this on this site in our lifetimes. It's just not possible. So once it's gone, we'll never get it back. I just want to say a couple more things about the community benefits agreement. And Vicki, I don't know how much time I have, but I'll wrap up here pretty quickly.
You have about 5 minutes, Penn.
Okay. The community benefits agreement, I actually call it the developer benefits agreement, because the people who agreed to this were folks handpicked by the developer and the city. It is significant to make sure that you know that no major R&O in Northeast Denver was allowed to be part of this process. No major R&O in Northeast Denver was informed about the process, nor told about the people who participated in the process. Like Maria, I met the attorney representing supposedly these communities at the city council hearing, asked for a copy of the agreement, and haven't seen it since. It is still a secret document. So ask yourselves, how can this be a community benefits agreement if the community that lives in the area is not allowed to see it? It's been secret who negotiated the agreement, and no one knows it's in it. This was just face saving done by the city and the developer to try to pretend that there is community support for this development. Last thing, and then I'll stop, Vicki, and happy to take questions. When many of you supported 301, that put an additional impediment to this effort to try to develop this site, we got citywide support at 63% to support open space. But what is significant to know is for the precincts on which this land sits and the immediately adjacent precincts supported open space 68%. So there's huge support for maintaining this as open space. The last thing I'll offer is if you go to the Yes on Open Space site, this is just a rendering of volunteer, and all of us on this campaign are volunteers. We're not getting paid. I have volunteered my time, as have others. This is an artist rendering of how this space could be reactivated. Notice that we don't play a shell game with you. We don't pretend that this stormwater area is ever going to be recreational. It's marshy, it's swampy, it's not intended for that. But we have a ziggurat, we have ball fields, we have orchards, we have community gardens, we have tennis courts, basketball courts, baseball diamonds, a kid's fishing pond. We're not saying this is what it needs to look like. But what we are saying is if you preserve the land for the community and let the community decide on how to activate the land, you'd be amazed at what you'd come up with. If 2.0 fails, this does not have to be a golf course, and the developer knows it. And that's why the developer and city put golf course in the ballot language, because they know that even those of us with yes for parks and open space, we don't ever want this to be a golf course again, but we don't want it to be smothered in concrete and developed with 12-story buildings up and down Colorado Boulevard. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Penn. I'll take a couple of questions. If anyone would like to address this issue. All right, then. Go ahead, Sarah.
Hi. Yeah, I was just wondering, two questions. One was, if we're not going to have affordable housing here, are we going to upzone other areas of Denver and of the community to be able to accommodate that much additional housing, both market rate and affordable? And then the other, and I guess 3 questions. Second one is from a safety perspective, I know that housing adjacent to parks helps parks feel safe. As a woman, I definitely feel that way. And so just wondering a little bit about how, a plan like this might feel safe, especially in the evenings and after hours. And then the third piece is kind of a regional perspective. Denver and the metro area is growing as a region. And so if we don't allow for kind of smart incremental growth within the city, that spills out, that equals housing and sprawl from here to Wyoming and from here south down to Colorado Springs. And so I don't know if there's any analysis that's been done on kind of, if we don't get housing here, what does that do to the region as a whole? Thank you.
Sure. Sarah, let me answer your 3 questions with the caveat that Vicki, part of this will go into my position as a candidate for city council at large, because I think Sarah's questions implicated that. So Sarah, number 1, in terms of safety of the park, please know that on the eastern boundary and the southern boundary, there are already houses around this land. So there's housing south, there's housing east. This is actually where this legend is the overlook at Park Hill, and there's just some housing and commercial further east. So it's bounded by housing on 2 sides. There is some housing here, and just to the north, there are a number of multi-unit developments, some of which are affordable housing, some of which are market rate, but this is all housing here, or housing development is planned. So residential and mixed use already exist around the site, number 1. Number 2, it is my firm belief that the absence of affordable housing is a regional problem. Anywhere you look in the Front Range, every community is talking about we don't have enough affordable housing. So Denver has to work collaboratively with surrounding communities to build more. I believe that Denver needs to upzone some areas. I believe we need to be receptive to allowing ADU development. We're going to have to negotiate that with different neighborhoods, but we need to allow more flexibility. We have to look at modifying the building code, because right now part of Denver's building code restricts how you can add on or make some other changes to your units. If you want to add a mother-in-law or father-in-law apartment, you ought to be able to do that, but we've got to figure out the right parameters in which to allow it to happen. And finally, I'd offer this. I've lived in Colorado for a long time, and for years we've tried to close the doors behind us and try to stop growth, but we can't stop it. We have to plan it for it, we have to anticipate it, and we have to manage it. We are going to see more dense development around the city, but the key, Sarah, is it has to be built around the city, because jobs are all over the city. People live all over the city. So different types of housing stock, both market rate and affordable housing, need to be incorporated around the city. And part of this we're going to have to do in conjunction with and in cooperation with surrounding jurisdictions. But my main premise is, with any of that development, what you aren't going to see is anybody making more open space development in this available in the city. Once we lose it, it's permanently gone.
I'm going to take one more question, John. Carolyn, if you would put your question in the chat, I'll make sure we get a response and get back to you. So John, go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you very much. I've been a resident in Congress Park for 32 years now. And one of the reasons I was drawn to this location is obviously the park and all the recreational fields we had there for our children, but also the amenity that we have on Colorado Boulevard and all the things that are out there and all the selections we have. And, where our old, kind of call it the old stops were for the streetcars on 12th. So it was this, I grew up on the East Coast, and it was this perfect combination of neighborhood, schools, and access to parks and access to retail. And it was all walkable. It was everything that we were looking for. My son grew up here, and he now lives in Northeast Park Hill. and he's looking obviously intently at the debate, and I just trying to wrap my head around, you know, the issue here at hand, which is what looks like Westside is proposing is very similar to what we see here in Congress Park. But how do I vote on something that affects this neighborhood so greatly and make it a, you know, I guess I'm not real happy that it's a citywide kind of vote here, because it affects them and can affect their quality of life. And the problem is he can't live in Congress Park because he can't afford it anymore, but he can afford to live in Northeast Park Hill. And so I'd like to see him have the same amenities he grew up with for his family than mine. And I guess the question is, as Kenneth answered it before, is this is a question between this and a golf course. How are we guaranteeing that we're going to get a great park, since I haven't seen anybody at the city raise their hand and say they can afford this park?
Sure, John. And I appreciate your concern. And let me offer a couple things to consider. First, with regard to your son's plight, one interesting thing to note is that Westside is saying they're going to have this property tax fund to help offset the cost of rising property taxes for owners adjacent to the land. The reason for that is they know their development is going to drive gentrification, and it's going to drive up the cost of housing. This plan is not going to keep housing affordable in the community. It's going to do just the reverse. My experience is similar to you, John. I mean, I've lived in Denver in Colorado since I was 11 years old. I had cousins in Park Hill. I'd spend the weekends with them. We'd ride our bikes to Dahlia, to Holly. We'd ride to the Dolly Madison that used to be on Colorado Boulevard. We'd do all of that stuff. There were amenities there, but the reality is those amenities, whether you, and I do think part of it was racial, that a lot of stores avoided Northeast Denver and left. But when the Central Park neighborhood was developed and they got 3 King Supers and a Sprouts, and every mayor I've known who's been in office since Mayor McNichols or Mayor Pena has tried to get a grocery store at Holly or Dahlia, and it hasn't happened. And what's interesting to note is this developer is telling you they don't have a grocery store. They just have land they will reserve for a grocery store. But at the end of 10 years, if they don't have a grocery store, it goes to some other use. And the reason they say that is, John, I've lived in Park Hill for more than 10 years, and we've gone without a grocery store for more than 10 years. When I represented the area in the legislature, it's hard to believe, but there were no banks north of Colfax, east of Downing in Northeast Denver for a long time. And that has changed slowly but surely. So we're seeing some infill development, some infill commercial amenities like along 23rd Avenue and a few other places. Oneida has been revitalized also. And I would submit those are the sorts of things we want with neighborhood scale redevelopment. Park Hill is not Central Park. And so we're not looking to replicate that model, nor should we. And finally, in terms of a citywide vote, 2 reasons why it's important. Because we are an integrated organic unit. We are all one city, and all of our fates are intertwined. And what happens in one neighborhood impacts other neighborhoods. So we all ought to have a say. And secondly, it was all of our tax dollars that bought this asset, this conservation easement. So it belongs to all of us, not just the neighborhood. And I live in the neighborhood. And even though my neighborhood voted overwhelmingly 68% to preserve open space, I understand that what happens here impacts the entire city. So the entire city should have a say. I don't have a problem with that, John.
Thank you.
Thank you, Penn. We're going to move on. Thank you very much for your
My pleasure. My pleasure.
presentation. We're going to move on. We have Tim Hoffman here, and he is running for City Council at large. Tim, thanks for joining us. Can you introduce yourself and tell us what neighborhood you live in Denver?
Vicki,
Yeah,
Vicki.
absolutely. And I appreciate you guys letting me speak to the group tonight. It's always a tough act to follow Mr. Penfield Tate, which I find myself doing a fair bit. these days. I am one of the 9 other candidates, or I guess 9 total candidates running for the 2 at-large Denver City Council seats. I live in the Corey Merrill Bonnie Bray neighborhood with my wife and 3 young daughters. We have a 4-year-old and twin 2-year-olds. The 2-year-olds at this moment are both asleep. The 4-year-old is roaming the house. So if you hear some pounding on the door, that is either my dog or my 4-year-old, and I apologize. But I don't want to take up too much of the time explaining to you who I am and my background, but I do want to tell you all a little bit about why I got into this race. And in a lot of ways, it started for me just over 3 years ago now. I was biking home. I'm a regular cyclist commuter, and I was about 4 blocks from my house when I was hit by a pickup truck, launched 10 feet into the air and landed on my head and suffered a traumatic brain injury. Was out of work for the better part of 6 months and spent about a year and a half relearning how to do basic things like walking and talking and making a morning cup of coffee. Anyone on this call knows that if you've had any sort of recovery or had any sort of adversity that you've overcome in your life like that, or a job loss or a death of a loved one, that recovery process is not linear. There are good days and bad days, and during it, there are milestones that you achieve and there are setbacks that you endure. And so I certainly experienced that in my own recovery. And I got into this race for Denver City Council because when I look around Denver right now and I talk to people in each of the 78 neighborhoods, I hear a lot of the fear and the concern over the scale of the problems we face around affordability, crime, cost of living, and all of these other problems that when you stack them on top of one another can seem insurmountable. But what also excites me about this race and what I hear in the optimism of the people who I speak with is that they know that with the right leadership and the people willing to do the hard work of governing, with a community of people around them, that we can tackle these challenges and we can build this Denver that's open, safe, vibrant, and accessible for everybody who wants to live here. That's why I'm in this race. In addition to being a father to my 3 young daughters, I've spent the last 5.5 years working as a prosecutor at the district attorney's office here in Denver. So I've seen every single day a lot of the consequences of the policy failures that happen upstream of the criminal justice system. There were people who were coming into my courtroom as defendants or as victims or as family members who were dealing with addiction issues, mental health issues, financial insecurity, housing instability, these systemic factors that often serve as the root cause of a lot of the criminal behavior that we see in Denver. And so the other reason why I got into this race is born out of a frustration with working within the criminal justice system and seeing that we were waiting until people had already committed a crime to then try interventions, then try rehabilitation, then try other programs that could maybe stabilize them in the community. And the reality is that oftentimes by the time they're in that courtroom with me, we're too late. A crime has already been committed, someone has been victimized, someone has been incarcerated, and it's really hard when you're talking about prosecutors and probation officers and judges to do the rehab and the treatment that a lot of these people need. And so I'm in this race for city council to move upstream of the criminal justice system and divert people from entering in the first place. So the question then becomes, well, Tim, great. That all sounds fantastic. What does that actually look like in practice? And I could talk till I'm blue in the face about all of the different ideas I have, but there's an example that I think is emblematic of the type of program that I would like to see implemented and the type of approach that I would like to see to these problems. In 2016 here in Denver, we took 285 chronically homeless individuals who had 8 prior arrests by the police department, so some of the most high-risk, high-needs individuals in our city, and we moved them into housing. And it wasn't just housing, it was housing with individualized wraparound services. So if you were dealing with a meth addiction, we were going to provide you some of the treatment needed to break that addiction. If you were a bipolar schizophrenic, we were going to help you get the medications you need to hopefully stabilize you. And what we saw at the end of that program 3 years after it began was that 78% of that population was still housed 40% reduction in arrests by the police department, 40% reduction in emergency room visits. So when you solve for one of these problems, in this case, homelessness, it has these beneficial knock-on effects around reduction in arrests, reduction in emergency room visits. So that's the type of program that I would like to see scaled up and built out in a more fulsome way. And again, that's just one program of many that I think is needed to address, again, the scale of the problems that we have here in Denver. I was born in the metro area, and I moved back here in 2016 because this was the place where I wanted to start my family, and this was the city where I wanted to raise my daughters. I think that most people in Denver feel that we're at this edge of tipping into some of the problems that we see with bigger cities, and the scale of those challenges, and the weight of the problems that they have. I truly believe that this election, and any politician who's ever run for office will tell you that this election is the most important election of our lifetime, right? That is not what I'm saying. However, this election, where we're going to be electing a new mayor and potentially a new majority city council, will be one of those hinge point elections where we can really change the trajectory of the city and really build it into a city that has some of the best open space and nature access in the world, high-paying jobs, world-class culture and restaurants, and available and affordable housing for everybody who wants to call this place home. I'm happy to take any and all questions you have. My website is timfordenver.com, and I'll also hopefully be able to post in the chat my email address so that people can reach out to me directly as well. I am always a believer in getting a cup of coffee with people, including those who disagree with me, walking around your neighborhood, seeing the things that you see and experiencing the neighborhood and the other parts of Denver that I don't get to see as much. So thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Tim. Does anyone have questions they'd like to ask Tim? Miles?
Hey, Tim, thanks for presenting here. The question I have is, and I only learned this because Councilwoman City Baca told us that City Council actually doesn't have a lot of control over the city budget. The mayor actually holds all the cards, and they don't even get current budget numbers as to what they're voting on. They're just supposed to approve it. And so what that told me was, they don't have a lot of power, and I kind of disagree with that. So in trying to make changes, how do you plan to get around some of those systematic issues with how the government's set up to influence and make changes as you're discussing?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think has to be it's for anyone who doesn't know. Denver has what's called a strong mayor system. So to some degree, the councilwoman is correct that the mayor is the one who proposes the annual budget. City council can vote on it up or down. They can make some tweaks to it, things like that. But in terms of most of the power that lies in city government, it is with the mayor. A couple of caveats to that, and a couple of the ways that I think I would be able to push forward an agenda working in conjunction with whoever happens to get elected mayor. Number one, it is true that the city council at the end of the day votes on the annual budget once it's proposed. But one of the things that I would like to see more of is going into the agencies 6 months before the budget is proposed, when they are going through their kind of list of priorities for that year and crafting their budget proposals that they're going to put forward up to the mayor, and working with mid-level people within city government. I worked in the Wellington Web Building for 5.5 years. I know a lot of those people, and working with them, not just when they're in front of a city council panel on Monday nights where it's public comment and everything else, but working with them day in, day out to say, hey, this budget that we're going to be actually debating in 4 months, here are the priorities that I would like to see addressed, and how can we work together now to make sure that those priorities are reflected in the budget. The second part of this is that city council has a bunch of separate subcommittees, right? So there's a committee on public safety, there's a land use committee, and those committees have an oversight authority and function where you are able to call in appointees and other individuals from the executive branch, from the mayor's office and from the departments, and ask them questions, right? And basically say, and I think that this is a frustration that I hear from a lot of people, that when you look at especially homelessness funds, we have in the latest budget, we have about $250 million as it relates to addressing the problem of homelessness in the city. And so calling in people from HOST, which is the department largely in charge of those programs, and saying, you know, where is that money going? How are we tracking how it's being spent? And most importantly, how do we understand what money is working and which of the dollars are not making sense, so that we can reallocate? And so I think that oversight function is another underutilized tool that I would like to employ more of. And then the last thing I'll say, City Council does have a pretty big role to play in land use, right? And so zoning and allowing variances and other things like that. And so that is an area where, especially around affordable housing and allowing the type of smart development that we need to host the booming population that we have, City Council really can do a lot as it relates to those topics, independent and separate from the mayor. So those are a couple of the ways that I would address it.
Thank you. I just want a quick question, and this is more current about BRT. If I could get feedback from you and Penfield as well. BRT is planning on moving forward and having a completed project on Colfax by, I think, 2027. I've been involved as a stakeholder with the group for over 12 years. They're moving forward with their CDs and are going to be requesting money from the federal government this fall or next year. The issue I'm having with the project, and I've asked them about it, is when are they going to engage the neighborhood with where the stations are located? When are they going to talk about the traffic impacts that BRT is going to impose upon the neighborhoods with center lane, center running bus rapid transit? I've been asking about this since last year, and they're silent. They won't talk about it yet. All of the calculations for the traffic needs to be submitted for the federal funding. So they're wrapping this project up, and they've not engaged the neighborhood at all. And so do you have any position on that? Because I just feel the process is broken. That these government agencies just start building, and then it's window dressing when you invite the public in. You can choose A, B, or C, but that's it. You weren't involved. You didn't have a seat at the table, and you didn't really engage the neighborhoods to begin with.
Yeah, it's another great question, and I'm sorry that you've had that frustration. And as it relates to community engagement, neighborhood engagement, it's a question that I get a lot. And what I can always tell you is that if I am lucky enough to serve as one of the at-large members on City Council, not only will I have an open door policy throughout my tenure there, I would seek to proactively reach out to community groups, neighborhood groups, and other people in the very early planning stages of a proposal that I'm going to bring forward to the full council, because I think oftentimes what I hear is a frustration that you've expressed, that the plans are made and then some of the community groups are looped in after the fact, and that leads to some understandable frustration. I can also tell you that there are going to be times where we disagree, right? Where there's a project that I believe in and that I put forward, but there's always going to be that ongoing conversation to make sure you understand why I am promoting the thing that I'm promoting, and that other people will have the opportunity to explain to me why they disagree. As it relates to bus rapid transit and multimodal transit generally, with the understanding that that project is still in the planning stages, and there are kinks that need to be worked out. The reality is 3 out of 4 people in Denver every day drive in their own car in this city. I am oftentimes one of those people, right? I have 3 young kids. I move around a lot in my own vehicle. If we continue to add people at the rate we are going to add them at, we're not going to magically find a bunch of new roads for people to drive their cars on. So what does that mean? We have to find other ways of moving some of these people around. Some of that's going to be by bus, some of that's going to be by light rail, some of that's going to be by bike, e-bike, scooter, all of these other options, with understanding that the reality is the majority of the people will continue to be in their cars. But if you reduce the number of people driving in their vehicles by even 10% or 15%, that benefits those people who are taking the bus or taking an e-bike, but it also benefits people driving their cars, because that's fewer people they're competing with parking spots for, fewer people they're competing at a traffic stop or a red light for. So I am a supporter of multimodal transit. I'm sorry that there's been that frustration with that project specifically, and certainly as I look at these projects and how I would like to move forward as a city councilor, it would be proactively engaging the community, whether or not we ultimately agree on whatever I propose.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. The future is multimodal. The problem I'm having is with the process, and they're spending city money, and they're going to ask for federal funding, and they've not engaged the neighborhood. You're correct.
Miles,
Okay, sorry. Penfield, can you answer that?
actually, he had to sign off. But we do have his email, and you can email him directly. Tim, we have run over time, but we have one more question, if you could take it. And I don't believe Sarah Parody, who was also going to be here tonight, has joined us. So Nora, ask your question, and then I have a couple announcements and we'll wind up. Go ahead,
Okay,
Nora.
thank you, Vicki. Tim, I just wondered what your position is on the Park Hill open space development.
Oh man, I was thinking I might get out of here without having to answer the question.
Not a chance.
Right? No, we were going to focus on the easy stuff like governance models and crime and homelessness. So I will be voting yes on the proposed amendment in April to lift the easement. I understand, and I've had multiple conversations with Penfield Tate. I truly believe that some of the framing around the issue it doesn't make much sense to me, where I think that we have a housing crisis in this city, that one of the best ways to deal with a housing crisis is through supply and demand and boosting the overall supply of housing in this city at all rates, including at affordable rates. And I think that this project does that to some degree, and it also creates one of the largest parks in the city. I do disagree with parts of what Mr. Tate said about it's either we vote to lift this easement or we can have this park later. The question in April, to my mind, is whether you want to have some development near Colorado and then a very large park, or if you want to keep that land privately owned. I again disagree that the easement language is pretty clear. The city attorney has looked at this, and other land use attorneys, and the consensus from a lot of those folks is that the primary use, exclusive use, has to be that 18-hole regulation golf course. So I understand it's a heated topic, and there's probably as many people on this chat who disagree with my position as agree with it.
I disagree with you, but I appreciate you answering my question. Thank you very much.
And I'll just say that, and I know we're over time, but I just want to just make that very clear. If you ask me a question, you're going to get an answer from me that's authentic and that is what my position is. If I don't know about a topic or I would like to do further research, I will tell you that as well. But I think oftentimes people who are running for office try to do this dance and these kind of answer, non-answer things. If you ask me a question and I've thought about it and I can give you a straight answer, you're going to get a straight answer from me. And this isn't the end of the conversation, I hope, and that we will have ongoing dialogue about this topic and many others. But I really appreciate your time. I'll put my email in the chat, timfordenver.com. Thank you all so much. And I appreciate you letting me speaking a little bit over time.
Thank you, Tim. I appreciate it. Penn, are you here? Did you want 5 more minutes about your candidacy? Okay, I'm going to make a couple of announcements. There are 4 candidates that are running for District 10 City Council and Congress Park neighbors. We are attempting to set up a meeting with them, a debate in mid-March. Currently, it's scheduled for March 13th. But that is a Monday night, and I have not been able to get a response from Chris Hines. Obviously, council meets that night. Earlier in the evening, I am attempting to change a date that might work for him, but I haven't heard back. So just be aware that we are trying to set up a debate mid-March for everyone to meet the candidates. And I would encourage you to look for other venues where they're speaking or recordings of debates that have been given. And then our next regular Congress Park Neighbors meeting will be April 19th. I want to thank everyone for coming. We had great participation tonight. Kyle, Rose, you put some questions in the chat. I don't know when the playground construction is going to start, but I will look into it, but I believe it's this spring. Thanks again for everyone coming, and feel free to contact our website at Congress Park Neighbors with any questions that you would like to have us ask the candidates ahead of time. We're going to send them questions to make sure the issues that challenge our neighborhood are addressed.
Thank you,
Thanks
Vicki.
again.
Thanks, Vicki.